Rome, the greatest empire the world had ever seen, reduced to ash and silence. For over 1,000 years, Rome was untouchable. No force on earth could break her walls. So how did it fall? Not in a single battle, not in a single day. It crumbled from within, slowly, invisibly, like a body that doesn't know it's already dying. Barbarian warriors at the gates, emperors stabbing each other in the back, plagues, famine, betrayal. This is not just history. This is a warning. Every civilization that has ever existed believed it was permanent. None of them were right. And Rome is the proof. Stay with me, because understanding how Rome fell might just help you understand the world you live in right now. This is the fall of Rome. To understand the fall, you first need to feel the glory. And the glory of Rome was unlike anything before or since. At its peak, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to the deserts of Iraq. 2 million square miles, 60 million people. They built roads that lasted 2,000 years, aqueducts that moved water uphill, laws that still govern our world today. The Roman army was the most feared machine of war ever assembled. But even the greatest armies in history have one fatal weakness. They are made of people. So let's go back to the beginning. How did this empire come to be? And why did it carry within it the seeds of its own destruction? Rome started as 7 hills and a lot of ambition. For the first 5 centuries, it was a republic, ruled not by a king, but by 2 elected consuls and a senate. This was radical, almost revolutionary. For 1,000 years, the civilized world had known only kings and pharaohs. The Republic gave Rome discipline, ambition, and a system of checks and balances that kept power from concentrating in one pair of hands. But ambition is a double-edged sword, and no one understood that better than one man, Julius Caesar. The general who conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and forced the Republic to its knees. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he didn't just start a civil war, he broke the one rule that kept the Republic alive. No Roman general was allowed to bring his army into Italy. That law existed for one reason, to prevent exactly what Caesar was about to do. And what did the Senate do? They panicked. Pompey fled to Greece. Caesar marched into Rome without a fight. For 4 years, Caesar ruled. He was brilliant. He was merciful. He was also insufferable, and he knew it. But power, absolute power, does something to men. It makes them forget they are still mortal. On March 15th, 44 before Christ, the Ides of March, 23 senators stabbed Julius Caesar 23 times on the steps of the Senate. They thought killing Caesar would save the Republic. Instead, it destroyed it. The civil wars that followed tore Rome apart for 13 years. And from those ashes rose one man who would change everything. Augustus Caesar, the man who killed the Republic and pretended he hadn't. Augustus was the first Roman emperor, though he never called himself that. He called himself First Citizen, a clever trick that fooled almost everyone. Under Augustus, Rome entered its golden age. The Pax Romana, 200 years of relative peace. Trade flowed along roads that connected 3 continents. Art, philosophy, engineering. Rome touched everything. But here's what history books often skip. Every golden age plants the seeds of the collapse that comes after. Prosperity breeds complacency. Complacency breeds weakness. And weakness, in the Roman world, breeds enemies. Who were Rome's enemies? Not just armies beyond the borders, but forces inside the empire itself. Let's talk about the crisis of the 3rd century, because this is where the empire truly began to break. In just 50 years, Rome had 26 different emperors. Almost all of them were murdered. Think about that. The most powerful position in the world, and it was essentially a death sentence. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguard, became the most dangerous force in Rome, not because of what they protected, but because of what they could buy and sell. In 193 AD, the Praetorian Guard literally auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. The Roman Empire sold at auction. His name was Didius Julianus. He held the throne for 66 days before being executed in his own palace. And now we have to ask ourselves, if this is what power does to men, what was happening to the ordinary people of Rome? Most Romans lived in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. They were fire traps. They had no running water above the first floor. They collapsed regularly. While emperors built marble temples, the people who actually held the empire together lived in squalor. This inequality, this canyon between the powerful and the powerless, is the first crack in any great civilization, but inequality alone doesn't collapse empires. What really does the damage is when the systems meant to fix inequality stop working. The Roman tax system, once one of the most sophisticated in the world, became a weapon of the elite against the poor. The rich were exempt from many taxes. The middle class was taxed into ruin. And the poor, they had nothing left to take. Sound familiar? The lesson of Rome is screaming at us across 2,000 years. But let's keep going. By the late 3rd century, Rome had another problem. It was simply too big to govern. Emperor Diocletian recognized this. His solution was bold, and it planted another seed of collapse. Diocletian split the empire in two, east and west, each with its own emperor. He thought he was saving Rome. He was actually beginning its division. The Western Empire kept Rome as its capital. The Eastern Empire built a new city, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. And here's the brutal irony. The Eastern Empire would survive for another 1,000 years. The West? It had barely a century left. Why did the West fall while the East survived? That's the question historians have debated for 500 years. Part of the answer lies with one man, Constantine, the emperor who changed the soul of Rome forever. In 312 AD, Constantine had a vision before a battle. He saw a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He won that battle, converted to Christianity, and made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. This was one of the most consequential decisions in human history, but it also created new divisions within Rome's identity, within its power structure. Because when you change a civilization's religion, you change its values, its military culture, its relationship with death and sacrifice. Edward Gibbon, the great historian, famously argued that Christianity softened Rome's martial spirit. Others disagree violently. The debate rages on. But there's one thing almost every historian agrees on: the barbarians at the gates. The word barbarian just meant foreigner to the Romans. But by the 4th century, these foreigners had become something Rome had never faced before: displaced, desperate, and enormous in number. The Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia. They swept westward like a wave of fire, and they pushed everything in their path straight into Rome. The Goths, the Vandals, the Visigoths, entire nations, millions of people, were fleeing the Huns and crashing against Rome's borders. In 376 AD, Emperor Valens allowed the Visigoths to cross the Danube and settle inside Rome's borders. He needed soldiers. They needed safety. It seemed like a reasonable deal. It was, in fact, a catastrophe. Roman officials immediately began exploiting the Visigoths, overcharging for food, enslaving their children, treating them like property. And here's the question I want you to sit with. What happens when you take an armed, battle-hardened people and strip them of everything? They revolt. 2 years after crossing the Danube, the Visigoths rose up. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, they destroyed a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens himself. Adrianople wasn't just a military loss, it was a psychological earthquake. For the first time in centuries, Rome felt genuinely mortal. The empire was hemorrhaging, losing provinces, soldiers, tax revenues, and faith. But still, it stood. Then came a problem nobody could fight with a sword: the plague. The Antonine Plague of 165 AD killed up to 5 million people. Then the plague of Cyprian hit. 5,000 Romans a day were dying in the city of Rome alone. A society that loses 5 to 10% of its population in a decade doesn't just grieve. It loses farmers, soldiers, engineers, craftspeople, the actual functioning infrastructure of civilization. To replace the soldiers it was losing, Rome began hiring barbarian mercenaries. This seemed smart. It was civilizational suicide, because when your army is no longer made of Romans, when the men defending the empire have no attachment to its values, its history, its gods, why would they fight to the last? Meanwhile, Rome's economy was collapsing. The silver in Roman coins was being secretly debased, diluted with cheaper metals to fund the endless wars. By the 3rd century, Roman coins had lost 95% of their silver content. Inflation spiraled. Merchants stopped accepting Roman money. When your currency collapses, everything collapses with it. Food distribution, military pay, trade, construction, all of it runs on money. And then, the final insult to Roman pride: the barbarians didn't have to conquer Rome, they just had to wait. In 408 AD, Alaric the Visigoth surrounded Rome with his army. He didn't attack. He simply blocked the food supply. Inside, people were starving. The Senate offered Alaric gold, silver, everything. He wanted one thing more: respect. When the negotiations collapsed, Alaric gave the order. On August 24, 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome. For the first time in 800 years, a foreign army had taken the Eternal City. When St. Jerome heard the news in Bethlehem, he wrote, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." The whole Roman world was in shock, but Rome didn't die that day. It limped on. For another 66 years, the Western Empire continued. Shadow emperors, puppet rulers, territories shrinking. By the mid-400s, Rome had become a Game of Thrones in the worst possible sense. Emperors lasted months, generals held all the real power. And here's the second moment I want you to pause and think about. When does a civilization actually end? Is it when the last emperor falls? Or is it much, much earlier, when people stop believing in it? This is what historians call the loss of civic identity, the moment when Romans stop seeing themselves as part of something larger than their own survival. By 450 AD, the Western Empire was barely a concept. Different Germanic kings controlled different pieces of what used to be Rome. Enter Attila the Hun. If Rome was already wounded, Attila was the man who came to finish it. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul, modern-day France. He burned everything. The Roman general Aetius managed to stop him at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, but the victory was hollow. Rome had to rely on Visigoths, former enemies, to survive. Its own army couldn't do it alone. Attila turned south, invaded Italy, and marched toward Rome. The city had no army left to stop him, so they sent a priest. Pope Leo I rode out alone to meet Attila, the man they called the Scourge of God. And Attila turned back. Nobody knows exactly why. Plague in his army, superstition, the Pope's words. History is silent on this. Attila died suddenly in 453 AD, on the night of his wedding. Some say he drowned in his own blood from a burst blood vessel. History's great monsters rarely get the endings they deserve. With Attila gone, Rome should have recovered. Instead, it collapsed faster. In 455 AD, the Vandals sacked Rome again. This time, they spent 14 days systematically looting everything of value that Alaric had missed. The word vandalism, the willful destruction of property, comes directly from this moment. After 455, Rome had 9 emperors in 21 years. They were mostly children, puppets, or maniacs. And then, on September 4th, 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer did something no one before him had bothered to do. He didn't massacre him, didn't burn the city. He just told the last emperor of Rome, "You can go now," and sent him to a country villa in southern Italy. And just like that, after 1,229 years, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. Not with a bang, with a shrug. But here's what nobody tells you in the history books. Nobody at the time realized it was the end. The date 476 AD was given to the fall of Rome by historians centuries later. Looking backward, to the people living it, it was just another bad year in a long string of bad years. This is the most important lesson of Rome's fall. Civilizations don't end dramatically. They end quietly while people are busy trying to live. So what actually killed Rome? Not one thing, not even 10 things. It was a perfect storm, and scholars have spent centuries arguing about which storm clouds mattered most. Military overstretch. Rome's empire was simply too large to defend. The border was over 10,000 miles long. Economic collapse. When you debase your currency to pay for endless wars, you hollow out the economy that makes those wars possible in the first place. Political corruption. When the people who run a system start using that system only for personal gain, the system starts running on fumes. Climate change and plague. Yes, Rome dealt with climate change too. The Roman climate optimum ended around 250 AD, bringing crop failures, famine, and population collapse. Loss of civic identity. This is the one nobody talks about enough. When citizens stop caring about the collective project stops functioning. And here's the truth that makes historians uncomfortable. None of these causes alone would have collapsed Rome. It was all of them at once reinforcing each other. A system failure of this kind is called a cascading collapse. And history has seen it happen over and over, not just to Rome, but what about the Eastern Empire? Why did it survive? This is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. The Eastern Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, was more urbanized, wealthier, and had shorter borders to defend. It also had Constantinople, a city so well fortified it was nearly impossible to take. And it did survive for another 1,000 years until 1453, when the Ottoman Turks finally breached those walls with the new technology of gunpowder cannons. So the question becomes, what exactly died in 476 AD? And the honest answer is, not as much as you think. The Latin language survived and became French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman law became the foundation of European legal systems. Roman engineering, the arch, the road, the aqueduct, concrete, shaped every city you have ever lived in. You cannot step outside without walking on Rome's bones. And Rome's greatest idea, that a government should serve the people, that laws should apply equally to all citizens, that idea never died. Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, they weren't just writing a constitution. They were self-consciously trying to recreate the Roman Republic and desperately trying to avoid the Roman Empire. They called the upper house of their legislature the Senate. They put Roman eagles on their currency. They designed the Capitol building to look like the Roman Pantheon. Rome never really ended. It mutated. It lives in your language, your laws, your cities, your government. You are, in ways you've never considered, a Roman. And this is what makes the fall of Rome not just history, but a living warning. Every empire in history that studied Rome's fall has eventually made the same mistakes. Currency debasement, political corruption, military overextension, loss of civic trust. We study Rome not to be depressed about it. We study it because the patterns are so clear, so visible, so well documented. that the only explanation for why they keep repeating is that we refuse to look. So let me leave you with the 3 things that Rome's fall teaches us, if we're willing to listen. First, no empire, no civilization, no nation is too big to fail. The very belief that you are exceptional is often the beginning of your vulnerability. Second, the most dangerous threats to a civilization are almost never the enemies at the gates. They're the rot inside, inequality, corruption, and the erosion of shared identity. Third, civilizations don't die, they transform. What we call fall is often just deep change, disguised as disaster. The Roman Empire built the world we live in, and then it collapsed. Not because its enemies were stronger, but because it stopped being willing to fix what was broken inside. And the most haunting thing about studying history, the warning signs are always obvious in hindsight. The question that Rome leaves for every generation that comes after is this: do we have the courage to see clearly when what we see threatens our comfort? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And it rhymes loudly for those willing to listen. If this video made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. History belongs to everyone, but only if people actually know it. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. We have episodes on the Black Death, the Mongol Empire, and the French Revolution waiting for you. Next episode, the Black Death, the plague that killed 1/3 of Europe and accidentally invented the modern world. The fall of Rome, 1,229 years, gone, and yet never truly gone, because in the end, Rome is not a place, Rome is an idea, and ideas are very, very hard to kill.